Alright, good morning everyone. Welcome to the Lookout. Today is the 9th of July and we're coming to you from Chico, California. If you're just joining us for the first time, Lookout is a user-sponsored media channel that reports on wildfires and forestry. So today we're going to talk about some active fires we've got in Northern California. I know some of you are looking at fires burning down the mountain behind you and thirsty for intel, so that's what we're going to do here. Just want to make sure things are all working before we get going here, so bear with me for 1 second. Looks like we're live. Great. All right. All right, so welcome to the Lookout. So we're in kind of the middle of a long-term heat wave here, and yesterday was a little bit cooler than it had been. It was only 98 in Chico versus 115. And the main fire we're going to talk about today is Shelly Fire. It spread a lot yesterday, but not as much as it had the days before. So didn't see any really explosive runs on Shelly yesterday. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Royal Fire that burned down by Sugar Bowl, Donner Summit area, and the Lake Fire in Southern California. If you ask questions over here on the side, I'll try to get to them at the end. But I'm going to jump kind of right into the Shelly Fire. So here's an animation of Shelly. So if you like me look at these webcams a lot, yesterday was a pretty boring day on the webcams. There was smoke inversion here in Scott Valley, and it didn't really lift all day, at least from the valley side. I think there was parts of the fire that were above the inversion, but as far as what you could see on the cameras, most of what it looked like through the day was just real hazy smoke. Around sunset, you could start to see the flames of the fire. So this is Kidder Creek across the way here. This camera is kind of southwest of Fort Jones. And so you're looking at kind of the mouth of Kidder Creek. Kidder Creek Camp is right in here. And Mill Creek comes down this next drainage. So this fire is doing what we're calling it's backing fire. I'm going to jump into a map here. So this is mapping of the fire taken last night at 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. And so for orientation here, we've got Etna here, 5 miles away from the fire. And we've got on this side Mugginsville, about 4.5 miles away from the fire. And then the Kidder Creek Camp here is about 2 miles from the fire. So kind of looking up Kidder Creek from Scott Valley. This is the fire. The fire started in the wilderness and spotted over the PCT a couple days ago, and it made some kind of strong slope-driven runs on that first night that it spotted over. And then these white lines are previous perimeters. So the fire was here yesterday. So the 24-hour growth is about from here to here. So not a huge amount of fire growth on that side. For a 24-hour period. So one of the reasons for that is just the inversion was kind of capping the circulation of the fire. When we have an inversion, it's stacks up layers of air and that kind of acts as a lid on the pot, we call it. And fires really need to breathe. A big fire like this needs to breathe. And so if we had, strong east winds on this fire and no inversion, so here we're kind of looking from the east, it would be running up this canyon. But the winds were kind of gentle, slope-driven winds, and there was inversion that kept the fire from breathing much. So it continued to grow in all directions, but none of it was, really radical growth. So we've got an operations map here from the fire command team, and they show their kind of desired line locations where they're planning to put lines in this kind of these pink dots. They're a little hard to see. They also show their other lines. So they've got right now completed fire line, a dozer line, down Whiskey Butte. There's a portion of hand line where it was too rugged for the dozer, and then dozer line all the way down to Patterson Creek Road at the bottom. The dozer line continues for about a mile north and hooks into Kidder Creek Road. And then dozer line, they're saying they're going to continue the dozer line out here. I can't see this road right now, and then over to Immigrant Creek Road. So this is done, and then they've prepped this road as fire line, and then so you can see bits of dozer line across from this road to Mill Creek Road, and continuing. There's some more going up towards Shackleford Creek Road. They're planning to put more dozer line along the base of the slope here. They're also proposing, and are probably already pushing, dozer line up this ridge between Shackleford Creek and Mill Creek. So the fire is kind of already up to the ridge between Mill Creek and Kidder Creek, and in some places kind of a little bit slopped over, and it's probably too late to put any line on that ridge. But they're proposing dozer line and road line and kind of mixed hand line, road line up the ridge between Shackleford and Mill Creek. And they're also proposing to push a lot of the lines here at the base. So dozers, I saw the briefing last night, they got 22 dozers that are out there pushing, so they're pushing it all over the place. So it takes a while for dozer line to catch up with, on the map, with dozer line on the ground. Anyway, so saw a pretty good public meeting last night on Facebook. I thought it was pretty good meeting. I mean, I wasn't there. I'm not a local. It's interesting to me. I got a friend who I went to college with, who I've known now for 25 years, whose name's Chris Christopherson, and he just this week became the forest supervisor for the Klamath. And I thought he did a pretty good job, all things considered, of addressing the issues. I know there's this there's an enormous amount of baggage and bad blood in the relationships between locals and the Forest Service across the Klamath, kind of across the political spectrum. Everyone has got some pretty major beef with the Forest Service. And I think Christopherson has worked there long enough in the Forest Service to understand why people would have a beef with the Forest Service, between the kind of overachievement of the Klamath in removing all the large trees from the forest in the 70s and 80s, planting tens of thousands of acres of plantations after that, and then not tending them, and then having them all burn up over the last 2 decades. That coupled with environmental regulation that has made it impossible to get just about anything done. So I think, he addressed some of those. I thought he addressed those comments pretty well. I think, haven't seen Christopherson for a long time, but he's a stand-up dude, and I like the way he responded to the meeting. So I'm hopeful. He talked about getting more fire on the ground up there. That's a hard thing to do, but there's any place you can do it, the Klamath is really leading the way from the public side, pushing prescribed fire. Anyway, I thought it was refreshing. So good luck, Christofferson. You got a tough job, and I appreciate your honesty. So speaking of kind of that public meeting, just wanted to look at a little at kind of where this fire started. It started in the wilderness, kind of out where you can't get vehicles and things like that. And I want to look at where it's going. So let's just kind of jump back into our magic flying map here. Let's just come back here where the fire started. So they're talking last night about how the fire kind of ran, that there's not a lot of continuous fuel out here in this this old burn. This whole area that we're looking at here burned in 2017. So if you come in close, you see like this kind of dead stick forest. We call this a snag patch in fire world, and so you can see this texture of all these standing dead trees. See all these down logs, and they got a fire going in here, and they got some smoke jumpers in there, and it kind of built up quite a lot of heat pretty quick. And it reminds me of the Dixie Fire. The Dixie Fire started in a snag patch that was about a little bit older, and it's just really hard. Once it's so dry right now that once you get these big logs on fire, it kind of doesn't matter if you soak this entire area in retardant. Retardant kind of coats the top of things, but retardant, if you got big dead logs on fire, it doesn't put them out. And so there's complaints, hey, why didn't you get smoke jumpers in there? Why didn't you get more tankers? All that stuff's got to be kind of thought of in the reality of like, hey, I'm standing in a thicket of thick brush and snags. Like if you ever tried to walk through an area like this, carrying a chainsaw and fuel cans and fire gear, you'll know that it's a pretty tall ask to get anything done out there. And then you're worried about all this dead trees falling on your head, and it's 100 degrees out. And so it's easy to criticize and say like, hey, they missed their opportunity. How come they didn't put the fire out quicker? When the reality is like, okay, like let's go backpacking with 50 or 60 pounds of gear into something that looks like this, and put out a forest fire when it's 100 degrees. I don't care how many tanker drops you got. Like the reality is that we've got a lot of land out here in Northern California that's burned in the last 2 decades. It looks a lot like this, and you can't always kind of get the VLATs to your rescue, right? Like the landscape kind of defines your options. So you got steep ass ground that's covered with dead trees and brush, and a fire going, and yeah, like we can't put them all out, folks. And so there's just kind of a reality check to like the limits of like some of these fires get away from us. I'm not making excuses, but it sounds like they did what they could with what they had, and that wasn't enough. And now we're at the mercy of the weather. So what we've kind of been saying since this started, or since it kind of came over the top of the hill, is that we expect it basically to burn this whole kind of Mill Creek and Shackelford. You know, I hope that doesn't happen. We're talking about them putting this line up between Mill and Shackelford. You can see that there's been line put up that ridge in the past. But as we said before, the problem is that this fire, once it gets down in the bottom here, unless they have time to do a firing operation off their dozer line and build some depth, which is going to be really difficult to do unless we get a dramatic change in the weather. Just because this fire only spread, you know, a quarter mile in each direction or half mile in each direction yesterday doesn't mean that it's not capable of much greater feats of acrobatics. So we'll see what the next couple days bring. But it's just history shows us that well-established fires in the Klamath rarely just lay down in July and let us put them out. Another thing that we got to think about here is we've got this stability in the atmosphere right now and this kind of long-term heat wave. We see our big changes in fire behavior when we kind of transition from like a high pressure system to a low pressure system. We got this ridge of high pressure that's built over us right now, and when that breaks down, we get a change in the weather. And so that means that atmosphere's moving, things are happening in the atmosphere. And oftentimes that means we get weird winds, we get instability, and so that's when our fires move. What we'll see again today probably is this fire is going to be kind of capped out by smoke. So let's just jump in real quick to, we've got the weather forecast here from today's incident action plan from Team 12 and CAL FIRE. Okay, leader's intent. Implement a full suppression strategy on Shelly Fire. Be professional. Okay, provide for firefighter safety. And blah, blah, blah. And keep the fire north of the Salmon River Road. Keep it south of Scott Bar. East of the Scott River Ranger District boundary and west of Whiskey Butte. So that's a pretty big box. Here's Whiskey Butte. And we're looking, so they want to keep it from going this way. They want to hold this line here, keep it from going this way. Here's the Scott River Road. They want to keep it on this side of the Scott River Road. So we're looking kind of west, and here's Etna. So they want to keep it this way from the road. They want to keep it this way from Whiskey Butte. And Scott Bar was way the hell out over here. They don't want it to get there. Well, yeah. I don't know if they just picked that because it's the only name on the map, but that's a long ways off. But realistically, what opportunities do they have before it gets there? Not a lot. Let's throw up fire history here real quick. That's the problem, right? Is that there's not a lot of fire history between this corner. So if you go out of Scott Valley and drop down towards the Klamath on the Scott River, kind of make this big bend, and I forget what any of this is called out here. Bridge Flat Campground, Kelsey Trailhead. Once you get over there, you get into the Frying Pan Fire, which is 2014, and that will likely slow the fire some. It's a 10-year-old burn, but there's a lot of there's less fuel in these older burns. So generally what we see is fires become controllable when they get into a more recent burn. Anyway, we got a lot of territory here that is prime for burning because of the lack of fire history. So let's turn off that. And let's look real quick. Had some more emails from Sharna Gilmore, who's Scott River Restoration Council. And she wanted me to talk some more about EcoTrust Forest Management. So they own a lot of this land that's kind of in the threat zone. And so far they've lost a bit. Let's see. Yeah, they've lost a bit of their ground so far, and they stand to lose some more. So she just wanted to point out again that EFM's done some good stuff compared to the last guys, and she wants to reach out. She reached out. She wants to talk about some of the good stuff they're doing. So we'll get her on. I know I threw these dudes hard under the bus. I got this big chip on my shoulder about carbon offsets, and I think I've kind of just been waiting for the last decade for a big offset project to burn, so I could say I told you so. So that's my issue. Not to smear some of the good folks that are doing good stuff on the land management side. I think the thing that bugged me was just that the EFM folks, their website is so they lay the bullshit on so thick about how great they are and saving the climate and everything else, and I just it bugs me, the whole. You can check out their website yourself. Eco Trust Forest Management Investments, and see whether or not it makes you cranky. If it makes you cranky, you're watching the right channel. Anyway, see what happens there to Eco Trust's landscape, and if you work for them and want to talk, I'd be happy to have you on the show. Because Sharna just kind of challenged me. She's like, "Well, what are you supposed to do with these timberlands that have been really used and abused for 100 years? Previous landowners took out all the biggest trees and left all this shit. Just all these little trees, and this is a 70-year-old burn that got reforested, and now some of it grew back, some of it came back as brush, and I think it's a fair question. Like, all right, well, what have you got to work with here in this landscape that's been so trashed over the last 100 years? What are you going to do to? And I think some of the stuff, it's like, well, the stage is set. It's some of this land. The train left the station when we cut all the big trees down, and we're on this trajectory with a lot of this landscape to lose it. There's not going to be anything we're going to do. The economics are against getting work done at the scale that's needed to actually let us save it when we have a fire during the worst heat wave ever, right? Record temperatures. Like a lot of this land we're not going to save. So I think part of us kind of coping with climate change and everything else is recognizing the limits, picking the places that are the most important to us, trying to save them, and that we have millions of acres of land that have been kind of ruined over the past 100 years that we're not going to get to before they burn up. Chris Terrell says, can we thin the forest mechanically and monetize the wood chips and logs by burning them for electricity and putting the CO2 in oil wells? I don't know, man. The whole CO2 capture stuff seems to me like let's just zoom out here. Just zoom out. Sorry. All right. CO2 capture. Like, there's a lot of. That's a big thing there. The globe. I don't know, man. Like, I think of scale a lot, and I don't know how you take all the CO2 in the atmosphere and like inject it into a little oil well. Like, there's a lot of things to me that like the scale just doesn't add up. Like, we think of the scale of our ability to like affect change on the like Earth's surface, and so when people are like, we're going to put up these machines and they're going to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere, it's like, all right, well, your machine, the Earth is 25,000 miles across, and your machine is like 100 feet long. So how much carbon you going to suck, bro? Carbon, bro. Anyway, and then someone else says CO2 is needed for photosynthesis. Yeah, we don't want to suck all the CO2 out of the atmosphere, that's for sure. I like biomass. I like biomass thinning. It is effective at scale. We can thin a lot of ground with biomass thinning. It requires subsidies, and there's this global kind of environmental movement against it because they don't want to see us growing trees just to burn for biomass. And I think we've talked about biomass on here where forest biomass, where there's interest in Europe in coal-free energy and burning wood pellets, and they're buying pellets from like forests in the southeast of the U.S. that are just being grown to burn. And so that kind of sets the kind of context for the whole conversation, for the whole world kind of saying that it's not clean energy and everything else. I think that's true, but that we have places all over Northern California where we have way too much biomass in the woods. And yes, I think you can't like take a global perspective on anything. You can't say biomass is bad because Europeans are cutting down forests in South Carolina to fuel their power plants. Well, yeah, maybe it's bad to do that, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't set up a biomass plant in Bieber and burn wood from all of our overstocked forests and burns. So I think anytime you get this kind of global perspective on stuff, it's not really healthy. Unless it's a global perspective on carbon offsets being bullshit, then I support that. Okay. Anyway, enough about carbon and this fire. If you're down here in Scott Valley, hang tight. You know, got a lot of folks there who are going to keep the fire out of the valley best they can, and hang tight. Someone says our carbon bros like finance bros. They're worse. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to jump somewhere else. Where are we going? Sorry. Okay, so we had the Royal Fire. Royal Fire's burning over by, get over to it. It's burning over by Donner Summit. This fire, the Royal Fire, got absolutely hammered yesterday with Cal Fire air tanker drops. So I'll get the map on here in a second. And I think the Royal Fire's done. Let's jump to that real quick. All right, so if we're looking here at here's Donner Summit up here, Boreal, Sugar Bowl, Old Highway 40, and up here is Serene Lakes. And so there was concern, this fire was in the bottom of the canyon down below Serene Lakes. There was concern it was going to run up there. There's a camp up at the Cedars that evacuated. And so the fire, the first day, burned. It started at the bottom of the canyon here. It's the North Fork American River. And this is kind of where it ran the first day. It kind of ran to the top of the slope. And then yesterday, continued to spread, but they literally flew probably several 100,000 gallons of retardant. I was watching the flight radar, and they were doing laps out of Nevada City all day with 2 planes. Sometimes they had 5 planes. They had some planes coming out of Chico. They had some heavy tankers coming out of McClellan. So this got just completely soaked with retardant. It's still super difficult terrain, and it's not out until they scratch a line around it. But it isn't very big at this point, 200 acres. And on the cameras yesterday, it was really subdued. Now you can see all these spots all around the edges. I mean, none of that's good. But one thing that this fire's got going for it is, if you go back and look at a video we did about a week ago about live fuel moisture, is it's gone into these brush fields out here that have a lot of green vegetation. If you look at the webcams around here, still a lot of green brush. And what we talked about on the program the other day about live fuel moisture is that when you've still got live fuel moisture, it means that the brush is still growing and hasn't gone dormant yet. It's hard for a fire to, it's pretty easy for a fire that's got preheating from running up a slope to overcome the kind of baggage of live fuel moisture. Live fuel moisture sucks the energy out of the fire because it has to boil off and evaporate the moisture that's in the vegetation that's trying to burn. So it's like putting green sticks on your wet sticks on your barbecue or on your fire pit. They kind of hiss and boil and water comes out the ends of them. Same case on the macro scale with live fuel moisture. So What we see a lot this time of year in the higher country where it's not quite ready to burn very well is that live fuel moisture, once the fire runs out of slope and it's not preheating, fires that are flanking and fires that are backing, they aren't preheating as much. You know, this fire that started at the bottom of the hill, all the heat from the fire is going up the hill and it's cooking that moisture out ahead of the fire. So it's kind of what we expected, is that this fire would, once it came out of alignment with the slope, that it would just kind of skunk around. But also it's just gotten completely painted with retardant by CAL FIRE, in large part because there's not a lot of other fires going on in this immediate area and they had full resources. So it's going to take them some time to get a line around this and call it contained and everything else. But yesterday on the webcams, it was not really moving much at all. Serene Lake's up here. My worry was that it would roll out and would establish, and the up canyon winds would blow it up into Serene Lakes. But so far so good. Right now, definitely not really posing a threat to Truckee or Soda Springs. If we have another 2 weeks of super dry weather followed by a massive wind event, this fire could do things. It's the time of year that nothing is, we don't say anything is like not, that anything's got zero potential, but things are going about as well as you could expect on a fire in this location at this time of year. And it's good that we don't have other fires that are competing with it. All right. Carolyn Lee Seamer says, she's in Greenview, evacuated. What's the outlook for her home? Well, I'll jump back up there in a minute, Carolyn. Good luck. Okay, we're going to jump down real quick to Southern California. Now we're going to look at the lake fire. Okay, so just to give you kind of regional perspective, we've got over here we got Santa Barbara, Goleta. Up here we've got Santa Maria, we got the 101 corridor, Los Olivos, Santa Ynez Valley out in here. Oh, sorry, map coming up. All right, we're in Southern California now. This is Point Conception, Lompoc, Santa Maria, Gaviota, which is where Highway 101 hits the coast, and over here is Isla Vista and Santa Barbara. And this is kind of the current situation on the lake fire. Lake fire is burning out into wilderness. See if I can draw my wilderness here. Sorry. It looks like my wilderness is only for Northern California. You got urban wilderness down here. Okay. Sedgwick is UC property. Is fire's kind of fingering towards it. So what you see here is the white is some mapping from yesterday, and yellow are places that are cooling down. And red's the hot. So big runs on kind of the eastern and kind of southeastern parts of this fire. Some of the places along the ridge, it's not spreading as aggressively, but the fire's at this point pretty big. I don't have acreages, and we kind of don't expect that this part is going to go out anytime soon. There's just not a lot of places that they're going to engage out here. They don't. Not many roads, not many kind of connectable ridges, and so we'll keep watching it, but I don't have a lot more to say about this fire other than it's big and it's going to keep getting bigger. Zaca Lake here in the middle, and over here's Michael Jackson's Neverland, which I have no idea what that is, but looks like it's some sort of amusement park or something. As we've said before, fires out here really don't hurt much. They create some smoke. Someone says, Scott Whalen says that it's been a lot of air traffic. Yeah, I watched. Scott Whalen says the work on Royal is very impressive, based on his position under the landing strip at the Nevada City Grass Valley Airport. Hi, Louise. Louise is retired Forest Service and knows way more about the Klamath than just about anyone in the whole world. She said that Chris talked about putting prescribed fire into the snag patches on the Klamath, and I want to talk about that a little bit too. Okay, this is wilderness areas here in green. Okay, so I'm going to transition here a little bit from kind of just talking about, I kind of feel like we've covered our active fires. Someone wants us to check out this fire up in Oregon. I'll do that real quick, and then we're going to kind of transition to a little more talk about kind of land management. Okay, here's Brownsboro. This is the road from White City over to Klamath Falls. I don't have great intel on this, but I do have the heat satellites. Salt Creek, I think you're talking about the Salt Creek fire here. All this red means it's kind of recent active heat, and that's a lot of it. So this fire's doing things, going places. What's near it? Let's turn on our structure layer real quick. So not a lot of structures out here. It looks like so it's burning. So you get Forest Service land farther up the hill, and this is burning in private timberland. Don't know much about it, but we'll start covering this Salt Creek as we have some time. Time's kind of limited in the mornings right now, so I'll see what I can get to. But looks like it's quite active. There's not a lot of homes near it. This side of the fire is already kind of contained by these green meadows, I would think. This time of year, this is September imagery from last year, and you've got all these. You got this ditch here along the edge of the meadow that's irrigating this all. So in the big picture, this fire is contained on this side by wet meadows, which I know doesn't help anyone who lives in this zone here. Second here. The train's not terrible here by Oregon standards, but it's also not it's not great. It's not like they're just gonna go drive bulldozers mid-slope around this fire. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on it. Okay. So just popping out here, as far as talking about so Louise was talking about Chris talking about putting prescribed fire back into these snag patches to manage to clean them up basically. And in these wilderness areas, we don't have a lot of other kind of management options. We can't really send loggers into the wilderness area and yard out dead trees. The dead trees don't have a lot of economic value. They don't have any economic value. And we've got so many thousands of acres of burnt forest that need to be cleaned up, right? And the longer we wait to do that, the more likely we'll have a fire that burns in this time of year in a snag patch and just incinerates everything. So let me see if I can pull up some photos of the Moonlight Fire, just to talk about kind of post-fire land management. So we've got over here, say like, we're gonna come back to my home country just to see what we can do here. I think this actually needs to be a separate talk, but so I have some time to load some stuff up. But you can see around Lake Almanor here, this is the Dixie Fire, and all the private timberland has been salvage logged. So all this kind of pink area, it's private timberland, and they came in after the fire, and it's slicked off. They cut all the trees down that weren't green, and some of them just got decked in the woods, depending on whether or not they had room for them at the mill. A lot of them got it to a mill and got turned into 2x4s. And now most of this land has been sprayed with herbicide and replanted with baby conifers. So it's kind of like this enormous fuel break. And then you've got, on the other side of the property line, you've got Forest Service land that has not had anything happen on it yet. And so you've got standing dead trees, lots of them, and brush coming in. So that's good for the deer, the brush coming in. It's kind of hard to go through the salvage private land and see all the brush dead, just as someone who's like interested in wildlife and deer and everything else. But that's how foresters are going to operate, is like the brush is going to outcompete their little baby trees, and so they spray the brush so they can get their trees to a height that can compete with the brush early on. But so you got all this private land, and then you've got all this Forest Service land that likely nothing's going to happen on a lot of this land. And so you're going to have this snag patch and brush field, and then 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if that burns, it's going to have this enormous fuel load, and likely the fire is going to spread into the plantations on the private land and kind of ruin the investment of the private timber. So one thing I've been looking at, and actually I have a project in Plumas County to kind of to look at doing, is how can we use these recently salvaged areas as a fuel break, basically, and put fire in on the ground to clean up after the last fire, when we've got a kind of minimal risk of it escaping onto the private lands. There's a lot of hesitation with the private landowners to burn because they're afraid that if they do burn and lose it on the Forest Service, they'll get a huge fine and they'll have to sell land to pay that fine. But there's opportunities on the landscape to put fire on the ground. Now, say, for example, out here, there's private timberland right adjacent to the Dixie Fire, and actually some of it within the Dixie Fire that got an underburn, where it'd be nice to come in and do an underburn to clean up the forest and make it more fire resilient. And right now, if you burn in here, there's like absolutely zero risk you're going to lose it onto the National Forest, because the National Forest land is burned and there's no surface fuel. So we get these opportunities after a fire to think big. And so when Christofferson, the forest supervisor on the Klamath, is talking about using fire to clean up snag patches, the only other alternative to not putting fire in these snag patches is to wait 20 years for them to be completely chock full of brush and timber and have them burn in July during the next Shelly Fire. And when that happens, we just have this kind of moonscape left over. So fire creates opportunities to use more fire. Here, this is the Moonlight Fire, and it's burned twice now in the last 17 years. And if you look at the historical imagery, like if you go back to before the Dixie Fire, you can see that the private timberland here had been salvage logged, sprayed, and replanted, and the Forest Service land had not been. And so a lot of all these little baby trees planted on private lands, And then when Dixie happened, here, I'll pull up an image here. Sorry. A lot of the trees that had been planted on private land survived. So quite a few of them died also, but sorry, it's not pulling up the right image here. So you can see that a lot of this area had been planted by private timberland companies, and quite a bit of it survived the Dixie. And a lot of the Forest Service land that hadn't had anything done just got completely hammered, just like it looks like this. So if you go back to like 2018, it's Forest Service land, nothing had been done to clean it up, and this is like 10 years post Dixie Fire, or post Moonlight Fire. Right, so the next fire came through and it burned super hot in these areas. And just basically you're left with this kind of moon dust. And so that's what happens when you don't do anything after a fire. There's kind of these two kind of bipolar approaches. Here's kind of right after the Moonlight Fire. The private land was salvage logged, sprayed, and replanted. Forest Service land, nothing happened. And then post Dixie, mixed success for the Forest Service, or for the private land, but they still actually have some trees growing. And the Forest Service land is just like going to be a brush field for the next 200 years. Forest Service actually planted some trees in their lands, but they didn't spray a lot of it. They didn't spray with herbicide, and those areas just, all their trees got nuked. So it's difficult in this climate change era to do all this stuff. But conversation's worth having, and blah blah blah. Forestry, like, either into it or you think it's boring. There's a lot going on there. I'm gonna jump off here. Gotta go to work. Thanks for supporting the Lookout.